just for anyone who doesn't know, briefly explain what curl is.
Well, so curl is curl is the project, and in the curl project we actually make two products really.
Okay.
We make a command line tool called curl, and we make a library that's called libcurl. So libcurl is the library that the curl command line tool is using then to do internet transfers really,
Right.
to or from a URL basically. So most users are then used to downloading a web page or something on the command line, curl and URL, and it'll download it, spew it on the terminal if you don't have any other options. But it also then it speaks, I think we now count 28 different protocols. It makes uploads, downloads, it speaks, countless different protocols and variations, TLS versions, flavors. So it's really a machine with a lot of different protocol tweaks and abilities in different combinations to basically do internet transfers in pretty much any shape or way you think you want it.
So right now, I'm not going to read the entire list, but notable ones are FTP, Gopher, HTTP, HTTPS, IMAP, SCP, SMTP, SNTPS, Telnet, and a bunch of others. If you want to read it, go to the Curl website. It's probably the easiest way to find it. Is that list up to date, or is there other things it does support?
No, I think it's up to date.
Okay.
Sometimes I go through that to make sure that it actually reflects my opinion of it. So yeah. So yes, it is. Actually, the most recent ones I'm working with is the WebSocket support, and they'll count them as two different ones. So the WS and WSS in URL scheme.
Okay.
Terms.
So when curl first started, why did you make curl in the first place? What didn't other tools achieve at the time, or were there other tools that were achieving the job that was even close to what you wanted curl to do?
There were other tools around, of course. I mean, there were always tools, but sure. It started, of course, before I named it curl, actually, because it started already in the 1996 when I wanted a tool to just download HTTP data every once in a while, because I wanted to download currency rates for my IRC bot. But so I wanted a little tool to download HTTP. How do you do that? I had no idea how HTTP worked, so I just looked around for a tool that did that for me, and I found one that was so I started with a tool called HTTP GET. Okay. That was released in November 1996. That was around 160 lines of code. It downloaded HTTP. Fine, that's what I wanted. But of course, it has some bugs and some tweaks to do. So I sent back some patches. It was written by a Brazilian developer, and I started to send him small patches to improve it. It's still tiny, right? So, but that's how I got into it. I learned how the HTTP. It's pretty easy. At least it was easy back then, or I thought it was easy, and it was easy to get started or tricked into believing it was easy. So that's what I have. And Rafael, then the developer of it, he sort of grew bored with me pretty quickly, me sending him patches, because I think he didn't really want to much. I mean, he didn't want to do much other than throw it out the door. Here's something for everyone to do. Right. I don't want to maintain this. You can take over. So I took over the maintenance of that tool in. Well, I think I started in late 1996 with that HTTP GET tool, and I played with that for a while until I found a Gopher site to download currency rates from as well. So I added Gopher support, and then HTTP GET was a stupid name.
Right.
So we renamed it to URL GET, and I already back then I started to get some other patches from other people too. So it wasn't just me already from those early days. So we started to do some other URL GET releases, and one day we added support for FTP, and because I found more currencies, I was a lot into currency rates. So I added FTP, and then after a while we added support for uploads as well, and that then URL GET became a really silly name because it wasn't only GET. There were URLs, but not only GET. So what should we call it? And also at the time, I realized that URL GET was too much of a sort of ordinary name, that there were also a lot of other URL GET tools, right? So how would you know which URL GET you were talking about? So it was just a too simple name to use. So combine there. So let's call it curl. So by the time I called it curl in 1998, in March 1998, it was already 2,000 lines of code. It did those 3 protocols. It had 24 command line options. So sort of that was the embryo. It was already a little command line tool that could do a lot of transfers.
So at that point, there wasn't a libcurl. There was just the command line tool.
Exactly. It started with a command line tool. And after a while, actually, so I managed to get that going, got patches back, people started to use it. And after a while, I always had that in the back of my mind that this could become a cool library because it's a lot of powers in being able to do good internet transfer. So I sort of figured or suspected that others might want that feature, sort of that power too, into their applications, and everyone doesn't want to rewrite their own HTTP code. So I turned that into a library in the year 2000 in the summertime.
Okay.
So from 2000, I shipped libcurl and sort of rewrote curl the tool to use the library. So that was a sort of a big shift internally. But since then, we have them both. And I've always kept shipping them both as in the same package, so the same. So they're sort of bundled when I ship the code, but they're separate. So you can use just the library if you want to.
So in a sense, maybe this wasn't your intention, but in a sense, the curl command line tool now acts as kind of a reference use case of the library.
Yeah, exactly. More like a binding for the shell, or sort of to access the library. Yeah, exactly. And it's actually also a very good way for me. So I often tend to, when I implement something in the library, it's good to implement it to make it available in the command line tool as well, because it makes testing easier and access to that feature much easier. So it's much easier to develop it when I can use it from the tool rather than just have it in the library.
So when you're saying you renamed the project to curl, you kind of skipped over like what curl actually meant. Like, why was that the name that you went with?
Yeah. So URL get being still a name, so I had to have a different name, and I liked that. I wanted it to be sort of a URL in the name because it works with URL, and it still does that. So I wanted something with URL in the name. So you know, naming is really hard. What do you name something? So for me, it just struck me that, well, curl, that's an English word, you can pronounce it, and the C could be for client maybe. I also enjoyed that you could actually say it like see URL. You could actually see the URL, sort of type it out, in the terminal.
Okay.
So, I mean, that was all I needed. So, and it was short. So I, command line style. I'm a command line user, so I wanted it to be short, sort of in the Unix tradition. So short, pronounceable, includes URL. That's all I needed. So